Mm, Muy buenas tardes con quienes están aquí en la sala y con quienes están en línea. Sé que estas sesiones de la tarde suelen ser un poco difíciles, pero les garantizo que hoy tenemos excelentes panelistas y son temas de interés de todos. Nuevamente, bienvenidos a esta sesión en la que el STDF presentará algunos de los muchos proyectos con los que contribuyen a la implementación del acuerdo MCF alrededor del mundo. El fortalecimiento de capacidades y la cooperación técnica es un importante pilar de las previsiones de trato especial y diferenciado del acuerdo MCF. En ese sentido, el STDF es una importante vía para que los países con capacidades canalicen sus recursos en proyectos que efectivamente apoyen a la implementación del acuerdo. Consideramos que este ejercicio permitirá a los miembros conocer más sobre proyectos puntuales sobre cómo dialogar sobre las lecciones aprendidas. Estos intercambios son particularmente valiosos para los miembros en desarrollo, ya que la cooperación, para ser efectiva, requiere una adecuada identificación de necesidades por parte de los receptores. Agradezco muchísimo al STDF y a todos quienes han hecho posible que llevemos adelante esta sesión. Paso la palabra a Melvin Spray, director del STDF, que presentará los objetivos y detalles de cómo trabaja esta organización. Melvin.
Thank you so much for those kind introductory words, and welcome again to this workshop, which was pulled together by the STDF together with the co-stewards to inform implementation of the MC12 SPS declaration, in particular in relation to technical assistance and special and differential treatment. As you can see on this slide, this first slide, the STDF is a sorry, back please. The STDF is a global partnership to facilitate safe trade, and it was established by 5 organizations, which you can see at the bottom of this slide: the FAO, the World Organization for Animal Health, the World Bank Group, the World Health Organization, and the WTO. And the WTO provides the secretariat of the STDF and houses and manages the STDF Trust Fund. We also collaborate closely, of course, with the secretariats of Codex and IPPC, either in their own right or through their parent organizations, FAO and WHO. Now, if we look at the STDF, of course, the STDF has a history, right? And basically, the first time people spoke sort of about the need for collaboration was at the Doha Ministerial Conference back in 2001. And that was when the heads of these 5 organizations came together and basically said, we need to explore new technical financial mechanisms to coordinate, to mobilize resources, and also to see how we can make most effective use of these resources. That sort of joint Doha statement led to the establishment of the STDF ultimately in 2004. Initially, the STDF was basically a collection of loose projects, but over time, the STDF has also looked into collaboration, into coordination, and to identification of good practice. The work of the STDF as it currently stands is led by a strategy, a 5-year strategy, which runs from 2020 to 2024. And it establishes the STDF as a funding mechanism for SPS projects, but also very important for project development based on international standards, the standards that we all know, Codex, OIE, and WOA, I should say, IPPC, of course. It also establishes the STDF as a global platform for coordination, for dialogue on SPS capacity development, and for the identification and the dissemination of good practice. So these are basically the 2 core work streams of the STDF as we currently have them. This is very small. I'm hope that you can see this, but the strategy basically outlines the goal of the STDF, which is around increased and sustainable SPS capacity in developing countries. That's what we are trying to achieve. And we're trying to get there and to meet that goal by focusing on achieving two outcomes. One is more synergies and collaboration, driving catalytic SPS improvements in developing countries. And the second outcome is greater access to and also use of good practices and knowledge products. But the question is, of course, how do we do that? What are the mechanisms of change? Well, working at a global, at a regional, at a national level, we are achieving these outcomes by convening and connecting a wide range of stakeholders in SPS capacity development, by delivering demand-driven activities to pilot, to innovate, also to learn from and to disseminate results and experience, and ultimately to catalyze and to influence change that drives SPS capacity development. That's, in a nutshell, STDF's theory of change. But the STDF is, of course, not operating in a vacuum. The question, why is it important to build SPS capacity is important. We all know in this room why developing SPS capacity is important for trade. But trade is not an end goal in itself. Building SPS capacity is also important to sustain economic growth, for job creation, to reduce poverty, to increase levels of food security, and even to protect the environment. And the SPS area is often seen as a very technical area, and it's often not well understood by policymakers, by decision makers, by those that make decisions on budget. Yet the agriculture sector is very important for the economies of developing countries, creating jobs. So the STDF's vision is very much linked to a number of SDGs that you can see here on the screen. There's a great STDF video, if you have time to watch, which explains, which was made about 2 years ago, which really explains why developing SPS capacity should basically be seen as a global public good, also in light of the pandemic. Now, the STDF also benefits from quite a robust sort of monitoring, evaluation, and learning framework. There's a strong focus on results in the STDF. And that's, of course, to ensure accountability, to increase learning. But we do a bit more than that. Every project in the STDF is subject to an external evaluation at the end of the project. A number of projects are also subject to what we call impact evaluations, a number of years after projects have been completed. We have also conducted assessments on gender equity in the STDF, looking at sort of how gender is addressed across STDF's work streams, and we are planning to do so also on the environment at the end of this year. During COVID-19, of course, this had a huge impact on STDF's operations. We issued a number of COVID risk management reports where we said, okay, this is how the STDF is impacted. These are the measures that we take, but also, again, looking at the learning. We, during the pandemic, also set up a number of virtual practitioner groups to discuss common themes in the STDF. Those virtual groups were also assessed. And eventually, the STDF has to be evaluated every 5 years. Every 5 years, there is an external evaluation of the entire STDF program. There have been 4 evaluations conducted so far, and the next evaluation will start at the end of this year with a report coming out at the start of next year. So very briefly, I mean, how does this work? So who's involved? Basically, the STDF working group, which is a group that operates sort of at a technical level, is the basis of the STDF, is the core of the STDF. The chairperson of the STDF working group is Gillian Milray from the World Organization for Animal Health. It used to be last year the United States Food and Drug Administration. And in addition to the founding partners that I already mentioned, as well as Codex and IPPC, we have, of course, donors as members in the STDF. these are donors that contribute to the STDF Trust Fund, but who are also providers of bilateral SPS assistance themselves. There's a mechanism in place for the participation of SPS experts from developing countries. And we also work with a wide range of other partners who join the STDF working group. The STDF, as you can imagine, has a broad network of organizations that we work with at international level. Think about the International Trade Center or UNIDO, for example, but also at regional level, regional economic communities, organizations like CABI or AICA or AGRA or COLEAD later on the program today. And then the private sector. We mostly work with the private sector, trader, producer associations within STDF project, but some private sector organizations also participate at the level of the STDF working group. There's a policy committee in place making decisions on strategy, and there's a small secretariat here in the WTO implementing STDF's work plan. If we look at the funding mechanism of the STDF, there's two types of funding available. First of all, there are so-called project preparation grants up to $50,000 US dollars. They basically serve to turn a good idea into a sound and sustainable project. And there are lots of good ideas out there, but sometimes the technical or the financial means are missing to make the next step. A large number of the project preparation grants are actually granted to least developed countries where the capacity to develop projects is also lowest. And that's good to see. And then we also have the possibility to finance projects in the STDF. Again, the type of projects that are favored in the STDF are very much linked to STDF's theory of change. These should be ideally projects that identify, that develop, share good practice, that include regional global approaches, projects that are innovative, replicable, collaborative, where there is collaboration across ministries or between public and private sector, or that are interdisciplinary, basically where the food safety, the animal and the plant health areas work together and not in silos. These are also projects that are highly appreciated. Just to give you an indication, at the moment we have around 70 projects in the STDF at different levels of, well, development or implementation or evaluation. And in the next session, you will have a flavor of some of the projects that the STDF has been funding or is still funding. How have these projects come about? What are the results and what are some of the impacts that we have seen from these projects? It's relatively simple to apply for funding in the STDF. All the information is basically available on the STDF website. Eligibility is basically determined by a country's position on the OECD DAC list, which distinguishes between least developed countries, lower middle income countries, and upper middle income countries. There are 2 deadlines per year to submit applications to the STDF, the next deadline being on the 11th of August. And the STDF team, the STDF Secretariat, is always available to help you. If you have questions about applications, we can help you also pulling an application for a project together. Now, when we talk about funding and we talk about sort of resources available, of course, we have the STDF, but the STDF operates at an annual budget of, at the moment, $6 million US dollars per year. This budget is generously provided by bilateral donors. Many of those bilateral donors are also here in the room, and we are thankful for that. But at the same time, there's much more happening. There's much more out there. So when we were preparing, for this workshop, we said, okay, let's go back to some of the reporting that has been done to the SPS committee. And a number of members actually have committed sort of reports through GEN documents. And you can see the members on the screen that have done so: Australia, Canada, European Union, Japan, Norway, and the United States. Now, not all countries, of course, have reported consistently or reported a monetary value. New Zealand, for instance, is also known to report on TA activities, but it never reports a monetary value, so it's not included in these graphs. Different currencies are being used, so we have converted the values back to US dollars and deflated to be in real US dollars, with 2020 as the base year. And I should really commend also the work of one of our excellent young professionals, Tamara Perso. I'm not sure if she's in the room, but she did excellent work in sort of pulling that information together. Now, what you can basically see is that there's probably a peak in reporting in 2007, 2008, 2009. Then sort of after that, TA sort of appears to be declining. But what we should also say here is that the United States did report on TA activities from 2013 to 2018, but not in monetary values. So again, you know, those contributions during those years are not included in this graph. The EU is the largest provider of SPS capacity here, SPS assistance. But we should also not forget that this includes also the assistance provided by EU member states. So that also explains why this is a fairly sort of high figure. If we take sort of the figures from 2011 to 2020, then we arrive at an average sort of monetary value of 123 million US dollars in SPS assistance being provided. But that's just a very rough indication, because the real values are probably going to be higher. Other bilateral donors provide assistance, but do not report. There are broader programs out there focused on agriculture development or private sector development. They may have SPS components, but it's very hard sort of to draw the SPS components out of there. In-kind contributions are not valued, and also South-South assistance here is not covered. But I mean, why are we showing this slide? I mean, first of all, I think, you know, SPS delegates, you know, may want to consider, you know, streamlining this reporting, for example, by agreeing on some kind of common template to allow for comparison and to make these reports, these GEN documents, a bit more useful. And second, you know, as I said before, the annual budget of the STDF is around 6 million, and that's very small, you know, compared to the ongoing flows of SPS assistance out there. So this graph really, again, puts the work that we do in the STDF into perspective. It really highlights the value added of the STDF, which is again linked to the theory of change, the connecting, the piloting, the learning, the catalyzing, and the influencing. It's really the partnership in the STDF that really provides the opportunity. The slide does raise a few more questions. For instance, you know, how can donors then sort of replicate and scale up some of the successful approaches initiated by the STDF? And how are donors using the information and the good practices that are identified by the STDF in their own bilateral programs? And some of the sessions that will follow today will speak about that as well. And that brings me then to the second pillar of the STDF, very briefly, which is the knowledge work. We have funded around 250 projects in the STDF so far. We've just seen also there's a lot out there in terms of bilateral donors providing assistance. So the question then really becomes is like, what can we learn from all this? Now, in the STDF, we are basically conducting this learning exercise by looking at cross-cutting topics. So these are topics that kind of cut across the areas of food safety, animal, plant health, and trade. And some of this work is also informed by the practitioner groups that I mentioned earlier. So public-private partnerships is one of those topics. What kind of PPPs, as we call them, do we have out there? You know, and what can we learn from them? Evidence-based approaches to prioritize SPS investments. There's usually 50 things that, you know, need to be done, you know, but how do we actually make decisions on where to invest using existing evidence? We've done a lot of work on reducing trade costs and sort of trade facilitation, initially focusing very much on implementation of Annex C of the SPS agreement, looking at control, inspection, and approval procedures. But that work got an additional boost when the trade facilitation agreement came into existence, which is an agreement that's not only applicable to customs, but is also applicable to other border agencies like SPS. And finally, you may recall that at the end of 2021, we issued a guide on good regulatory practice. And here we're basically looking at, how can SPS regulators ensure that SPS measures are fit for purpose? Why should we work on good regulatory practices? What kind of GRPs are out there, and how can countries work on GRPs? Some of these cross-cutting topics will again also be dealt with and addressed in the sessions that will come after this one. If we look ahead, there are a number of topics in the STDF that are coming up in discussions among members or within the projects. Some of these topics also reflect topics that are mentioned in the MC12 SPS declaration. There are discussions around sort of food systems approaches, One Health approaches, more integrated, more comprehensive approaches, digitalization, new technologies, electronic certification. In that area, the STDF has funded a number of projects, remote inspection, mobile testing labs, IT for pest surveillance, and so on. These are all sort of projects that we fund in the STDF. We do see more focus on regional trade, regional integration, and also South-South trade, which does pose questions also to the SPS sort of import systems, also of developing importing members. And we do also see, and also a number of STDF projects, a lot of South-South assistance being provided as well. And also in the next session, there will be a few projects that are examples of those. I mentioned the assessment that we recently did on gender equality and gender inclusion in the STDF, and that's being followed up by basically a work plan that's being put in place. And finally, as I mentioned, we will conduct an environmental assessment of STDF's work towards the end of the year, which will also, again, look at some of the work that the STDF has done now more than a decade ago on invasive species, on climate change, on pesticides, and more. What are the opportunities to benefit and to learn, also for committee members? Well, I mean, use and disseminate STDF knowledge products, publications, briefings, videos, and so on. Join the STDF practitioner groups, share information in those groups, and also learn from others. Of course, connect developing countries to STDF's knowledge, but also to the grant mechanism. Explore, and this is also directed towards some of our donor members, explore options to co-fund, to scale up some of the STDF's safe trade projects. And finally, we issue a newsletter every month, so you can sign up for this newsletter. And finally, this is my last slide. A big thanks to our donor members who make all the work of the STDF possible, and without their support, a lot of projects would not be funded. So a big thanks to our donors. So I leave it at that. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Melvin. En este momento damos la palabra a quienes tengan preguntas o comentarios. La Unión Europea.
Thank you. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Many thanks for this very informative overview and summary. And just a sort of technical information, as I be mentioned to some of you later this week during the formal session of the committee, we will provide the latest update on the EU technical assistance. So the years for 2019 and 20 will be filled. And we actually fully agree with the suggestion that maybe further streamlining should be reflected upon. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. ¿Alguien más? Sí, al parecer no hay más interés, estuvo todo muy claro, nadie más desea intervenir de momento. Entonces pasamos a la primera sesión que se llama Resultados en el campo. Será facilitada por Joe de Australia, la otra cofacilitadora de este grupo de trabajo. Joe, tienes la palabra.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this workshop. We've been talking about this in Group 5 for some time now, and I'm delighted to welcome you all and start the first panel session. So please join me in welcoming today Koa Dang Lee. He's from the Western Highlands Agroforestry Science Institute in Vietnam. Brenda Kisingiri, she's from the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries, Uganda. And Veronica Picado, who's from the Minor Use Foundation in Costa Rica. So we're going to go straight into the presentations. We'll have 3 presentations and then we'll do questions as a group. So I'd like to invite Veronica to start her presentation. Thank you.
Bueno, buenas tardes a todos. Primero quisiera agradecerles este espacio. Mi nombre es Verónica Picado. Yo soy consultora de la Fundación de Usos Menores y del Instituto Interamericano de Cooperación Agrícola. Y hoy les voy a compartir sobre varios proyectos que estamos trabajando de forma articulada con diferentes organizaciones que son impulsados por el STDF en busca del desarrollo de capacidades, buscando siempre un alimento seguro, nutritivo, de calidad y la facilitación del comercio. Pues bien, para ninguno de ustedes debe ser desconocido que actualmente nuestros productores tienen que trabajar bajo una agricultura inteligente que busque siempre o contemple lo que es la seguridad alimentaria, la exposición de los trabajadores y el impacto ambiental. Todo esto nuestro agricultor tiene que lograrlo bajo desafíos, contemplando diferentes estándares de inocuidad, desarmonización en algunos de ellos, rigurosidad de ciertas tolerancias, especialmente de límites máximos de residuos de plaguicidas, que es en lo que voy a enfocar mi presentación, y esto le puede llevar a elevados costos de producción y un rechazo de las exportaciones. Quisiera por un momento hacer énfasis en lo que es la desarmonización. Construimos este ejemplo hipotético sobre la regulación centroamericana. Este es un ejemplo del escenario que vive un agricultor cuando se encuentra ante regulaciones armonizadas y cuando se encuentra ante regulaciones no armonizadas. Acá tomamos un agricultor que quiere exportar a todos los países de la región centroamericana y él tiene un cultivo A al cual le va a aplicar un plaguicida X, pero ese plaguicida cuenta con una tolerancia establecida en el códex. Bajo este escenario, tenemos un agricultor feliz, él puede utilizar un patrón de uso que le va a generar un residuo y ese residuo va a ser chequeado por los diferentes países de la región con la misma tolerancia establecida. Pero ¿qué pasa para este agricultor cuando tiene un cultivo B o un cultivo C al cual le va o necesita aplicar un plaguicida que no tiene un LMR establecido en códex? Pues bien, las regulaciones en Centroamérica adoptan códex. Nosotros en nuestra región no establecemos LMR, sino adoptamos los de códex. Y cuando códex no tiene, lo que permite la regulación es adoptar como segunda opción los valores establecidos en Estados Unidos o en la Unión Europea. Hasta ahí todos los países están armonizados, pero la forma de adoptar esa segunda opción tiene 5 diferentes variables que hacen que ese exportador pueda tener rechazos prácticamente en la mitad de los países de la región a los que desea exportar. Hay estudios de impacto económico que dicen, por ejemplo, que un país como Costa Rica entre el 2016 y el 2020 tuvo una afectación de alrededor de 1.400 millones de euros en lo que fue sus exportaciones de vegetales, y esto debido a motivos específicos de tolerancia, desarmonización, rigurosidad del MRs o ausencia de los mismos. Aunado a esto, si pudieran revisar las bases de datos de los LMRs adoptados, es muy popular encontrar el valor de 0,01 adoptado, que es un valor riguroso para el trabajo de un agricultor y que se podría mejorar si se enviaran o se generaran datos a Codex, especialmente para la gran cantidad de cultivos pequeños que hacemos en nuestras regiones. Es por esto que alrededor del año 2012 hubo un proyecto, el PG 436, que fue un capital semilla, en el cual se tomó 5 países y se les enseñó a generar ese paquete de datos para enviar al Códex Alimentarios y que se pudiera establecer una tolerancia para plaguicidas. Resultados, pues tuvimos las tolerancias para los cultivos que se trabajaron, se desarrolló capacidad técnica en el ámbito de campo, de laboratorio, de aseguramiento de calidad y pues obviamente se mejoraron los mercados para las tolerancias trabajadas. Pero en el fondo, lo más importante del proyecto es que creó una estructura de trabajo en la cual los países vieron que podían generar esos datos y se tuvo la idea o se tuvo la iniciativa de crear una fundación para promover el trabajo especialmente en los cultivos menores o en los cultivos especiales. Este fue un proyecto global, pero ahorita me estoy enfocando únicamente a lo que es la experiencia de América Latina. En sí, entonces, tenemos una red de trabajo creada desde el 2012 con ese capital semilla aportado por el STDF en apoyo con otras organizaciones como el USDA, el IR4 y el IICA, que le ha venido dando sostenibilidad por medio de la Fundación de Usos Menores que acompaña a los países a continuar desarrollando estos datos. En sí se han venido uniendo países, Ecuador y Perú se unieron alrededor del año 2018, hicieron sus primeros paquetes de datos, se comenzó conversaciones con Argentina y ya hoy en día tenemos otros países que están preparándose para iniciar sus primeros trabajos. Otros países que tienen mucha experiencia en este tipo de trabajo reportan un alto retorno económico a la inversión en la generación de datos que se transforma en un bien para sus agricultores y todo esto es un trabajo colaborativo entre diferentes entidades, industrias, universidades, gobiernos locales. Ya aprendimos que Latinoamérica es un gran productor de cultivos pequeños y que esos cultivos pequeños tenemos falta o disponibilidad de tecnología y con eso me refiero a sustancias disponibles para mitigar plagas y que estas sustancias tienen poca disponibilidad de tolerancias o las que hay suelen ser muy rigurosas. Es muy importante para nosotros desarrollar capacidad técnica en la región, pero también habilidades blandas para poder trabajar de forma colaborativa en toda la región. Necesitamos desarrollar trabajo en equipo, desarrollar el liderazgo que tienen muchos de los países, poder enseñarle a ese técnico a transmitir los problemas técnicos que tiene a un nivel político para poder crear programas nacionales o regionales que ayuden a impulsar la agricultura. Se ocupa definitivamente una armonización, como les expliqué en mi diapositiva anterior, pero también se ocupa tener un respaldo regulatorio o que dentro de las regulaciones se incluya lo que es la generación de datos para poder tener un sistema sostenible y que toda esta capacidad que se genere llegue al agricultor. Ocupamos un productor mediano o pequeño que conozca sobre residuos de plaguicidas, que los sepa mitigar. Entonces necesitamos tener una extensión agrícola y obviamente una tecnología de mitigación innovadora que logre afrontar los retos actuales que tienen nuestros productores. Y es por esto que venimos trabajando bajo 3 pilares o 3 proyectos que se han convertido en una base para lo que es la mitigación de residuos. Uno es el que les he estado explicando con la Fundación de Usos Menores, que en sí, a nivel técnico, lo que hacemos es enseñar a generar datos y preparar ese paquete de datos para entregar al Códex Alimentario. Es un acompañamiento en el desarrollo de capacidades, pero en el fondo, nuestro modelo lo que busca es tomar recursos públicos y entregar a la sociedad civil formas de generar alimentos nutritivos, seguros, de calidad y una facilitación del comercio. Y además de ayudar en esa investigación con una ciencia de excelencia para que los países puedan generar los datos. Paralelo a esto, pues ocupamos una base regulatoria para que pueda haber sostenibilidad a largo plazo. Entonces tenemos un proyecto liderado por el IICA en la región, soportado también por el USDA y por medio de fondos, con el cual estamos trabajando la alineación regulatoria en 3 sentidos. Todo lo relativo a residuos de plaguicidas, especialmente con la armonización de esas rutas de adopción para que ya ese agricultor no tenga 5 escenarios diferentes, sino solo uno. lo que es registro de plaguicidas y registro de bioplaguicidas. En la región estamos ahorita empezando muy fuertemente, bueno, más bien culminando con la región centroamericana y ahí vamos avanzando con las diferentes regiones. Y por último, el proyecto PG753, este proyecto acaba de iniciar y lo que busca es integrar nuevas tecnologías para hacer mitigación, como lo que es el uso de bioplaguicidas. Voy a enfocarme un poco en este proyecto. En sí, contempla 12 países. De esos 12 hay 3 países líderes que han venido trabajando y desarrollando capacidad técnica, tienen experiencia regulatoria o experiencia en capacidad asociativa. Y la intención es que ellos acompañen a los países que se están integrando, ya sea con entrenamiento, con intercambio de experiencias, para ir desarrollando procesos. Entonces, el proyecto en sí tiene 5 pilares: desarrollo de redes de trabajo, lo que es la mitigación de residuos. Esperamos al final tener una estructura para programas regionales de usos menores, un componente regulatorio, como ya lo vieron, entrenamiento. El proyecto soporta la creación de un centro de entrenamiento en la Universidad Nacional de Colombia, quien se va a enfocar a desarrollar capacidades técnicas, y la Universidad de Costa Rica está creando una plataforma para lo que es el desarrollo de las habilidades blandas en conjunto con la Universidad de Carolina del Norte. Y por último, una parte de extensión para que toda aquella capacidad técnica que se está desarrollando no quede únicamente en los gobiernos o en la academia, sino que llegue al productor. ¿Qué esperamos entonces? En resumen, técnicamente, pues el proyecto es enseñarle cómo el periodo que tiene que esperar nuestro agricultor desde su última aplicación, tiene que esperar varios días para que el residuo se degrade y logre cumplir las tolerancias de los diferentes mercados. Durante ese periodo el agricultor tiene su producción sin protección. Entonces, que integre un bioplaguicida para que logre mantener la contención de la plaga y logre cumplir los residuos de los diferentes mercados. Eso es técnicamente, pero el proyecto con los 5 pilares va más allá porque quiere dejar una base regulatoria, operacional y de desarrollo de capacidades para que los resultados que generemos sean sostenibles durante el tiempo. Bueno, les agradezco mucho, no les quito más tiempo, les queda mi contacto, pues, están libremente invitados a escribir, y con la imagen, la verdad queríamos resaltar que se sembró una semilla que ramificó raíces por medio de diferentes organizaciones y poco a poco ha ido ramificando y se van uniendo más organizaciones de la región para construir una agricultura inteligente. Muchas gracias.
Veronica, thanks so much for your presentation. A lot of good detail in there, and I think quite a few of the themes we have been talking about in Group 5 in terms of South-South cooperation, the capacity building, the structures, the extension, and of course a really great example of giving developing countries the skills, the tools, and a data-rich environment to actually engage in standard-setting bodies. And of course, a fantastic link to Codex. And as I understand it, this project has actually developed a Codex MRL and the capacity or the data to deal with Codex to set up potentially up to 82 more MRLs, which would be for minor use crops, particularly grown in Latin America, which is pretty exciting. All right, our next presentation is from Uganda. So Brenda, please do commence.
Thank you very much. I can be heard. Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for attending this side session. And I would like to thank the STDF for giving Uganda an opportunity to tell its story. It's a story of about 2.5 years, but I'm going to try and compress it within 10 minutes, if I can make it. So Uganda, the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries has a department called Crop Inspection and Certification. That is the National Plant Protection Organization of Uganda. And this department previously implemented a flower project between 2012 and 2015. It was particularly specifically targeting interceptions in the flower sector. We wanted to strengthen the capacity of the floriculture sector to mitigate the pests. So in 2019 to 2022, there was another build-up project on improving SPS systems in Uganda. And this was the project SCDF-PG 543. This particular project was about mitigating interceptions. There were increasing interceptions, specifically in the European Union, and we had limited market access to the other countries. The problem was because there were a number of pests, which we call harmful organisms, that were associated by the pests. And it was important that this situation is reversed. I'll give an example. In 2020, we had about 150 interceptions. So this was really impacting on the livelihoods of farmers and the country at large. During the project design, a number of reasons were attributed to this problem. If you look at the project document, we developed specific activities to try and address the root causative factors. And I'm going to give a summary of some of the key results of this particular project. Because there are quite a number, I just had to scan a few. This project, we trained 1,400 farmers who were specifically growing fruits and vegetables. And on top of that, we had to train private sector agronomists. We also had to train the inspectorate. And because we had to train, training was core because it seemed as though farmers did not know exactly what they had to mitigate, what they had to comply with. They did not know what the trading partners' requirements were. And also, we had to train the private sector because private sector, we had designed a program to have private agronomists because the country had few extension staff. It was important that we innovate as an NPPO to encourage private sector companies to have their own extension staff. So this project targeted to train both the farmers and the private sector, but also training the inspectors because they are the ones supposed to ensure adherence to standards. So because a lot of training was involved, sensitization was involved, we had to make sure that we develop a curricula. We had scanned and realized that many initiatives were going on for training in the sector, but realized the desired impact was not there. So it was critical that we develop a curricula that we use as an NPPO, but also to roll it out to the private sector so that the message that goes out is harmonized, accurate, and approved by the ministry. Another thing that a key result for the project, we require farmers to do pest scouting because pest reporting is a national obligation and it's also provided for under the IPPC and the WTO SPS agreement. So farmers are required to report, to do scouting and tell us what have they seen on their farms. Based on that, mechanisms are put into place to mitigate the problem. Also, because we conduct a number of audits, we have developed and distributed these audit checklists so that we can facilitate trade. We require you to know exactly what you're going to audit you about, because this is also a requirement. in the SPS agreement, transparency provisions, Annex B and C. It is critical that the private sector know exactly what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, how you're going to do it, so that we can facilitate trade. We realized that for us to enhance compliance, it was important that we translate these documents that we had initially put on our website into the local languages. We designed and piloted a surveillance protocol for the major quarantine pests that had been identified in the project document that were causing the several interceptions. During this design, I'm happy to report that as we implemented the project, we realized that there were other initiatives going on. And at this time, COLEAD had come on board. We had signed an MOU with them, and they had a very good curricula on surveillance. So we agreed that they train the inspectors, and then the inspectors would go and train the private sector. And then together with private sector, we developed the protocols for those quarantine pests, which we did as a PPP. In fact, during COVID time, when we couldn't do a lot of physical activity, that's when COLEAD designed an online course. And that's when private sector were trained. The project had targeted to streamline registration, inspection, certification for the private sector, because not only were the pests causing interceptions, but documentation and forgeries, smuggling were a problem in the sector. So it was also critical that we bring down those interceptions, because the project's #1 goal objective was to reduce and mitigate interceptions. This was a cornerstone for us, because as we were developing the checklist, the scouting sheets, the registration procedure, it was critical that we communicate exactly what the procedure is, what documents will be used, at which stage will they be used. So this was an output of the project. But this particular output was enhanced by two things. First, through collaboration. We realized that as an NPPO, there's a limit to registration we can do. Registration of businesses is under the Ministry of Trade, under the Uganda Export Promotion Board. So as we kept implementing the project, we realized we had to keep on bringing other entities on board. So in the streamlining, we had to work with those entities, whereby Ministry of Trade registers businesses, the Uganda Registration Bureau, but also Uganda Export Promotion Board actually registers and trains exporters. It has an export readiness course. And then we also realized that private sector associations had a role in this. We were taking on a lot, and us were inspectors, agronomists, entomologists. So we had to sit down and agree which entity will do which bit before everybody comes to us for the final audit. And I'm also happy to note that this streamlined procedure was further enhanced by the eFITO. When the eFITO came on board, we quickly jumped to this opportunity because we knew then nobody would be able to smuggle again. Documentation interceptions would be reduced. So that's why Uganda was one of the first countries to really embrace eFITO. And smuggling is in history. in this sector. Another key result, we established an SPS sharing platform because we realized SPS can be a little bit complicated. And most of the farmers involved in this sector and a few of the exporters are semi-illiterate. Some are illiterate. And SPS terminologies can be very complicated. And then also we realized that some of the non-compliances, incompliances, were because of lack of information. Then we also realized that the sector was poorly funded, not coordinated, and we felt that this sharing platform would be able to provide a forum for all these different stakeholder wishes to be involved. So it includes public, private sector, development partners, academicians, politicians. So it's working well. We have about 180 people, 99 companies are represented, packaging, research, individuals. So this has also helped in shaping policy, advocacy, and it's still growing. The project supported development of pest fact sheets and farmer-led training videos. This is critical because we've realized that many youth and even adults nowadays don't like reading too much. They like listening to viewing videos. Pictures are easier. And there's a technology, we are calling it the phototechnic technology. We are piloting. It enhances interest in learning to know what is there. And also we used these training videos as a learning tool, a teaching tool. We used farmer leaders to talk about exactly what have they learned, what do they do, what are they required to do by the NPPO. So some of these videos are farmer-led, and we feel that it would be easier for a farmer to talk to a farmer. And for us, our knowledge, we pass it through the pest fact sheets, through the pictures. And all these documents have been validated by the farmers. We strengthen field and exit inspections and the pest risk analysis unit. For compliance to happen, we needed to be along the value chain. And Uganda has embraced the systems approach in management of pests. We started off with the hot pepper, capsicum commodity, and we were successful in submitting the technical dossier to the EU, which was approved. And we felt that this is a system that we could roll out to the various commodities of primary concern. And that meant inspectors have to be along the value chain. Private sector has to know exactly what they have to do along the value chain. The project required the ministry to recruit inspectors, at least 7, because at the time we started, we had about only 4 managing this sector. But I'm happy to report that we have recruited 23 at the exit, plus 3 additional senior inspectors. We have recruited, now we have 15 at the packing facility level, and we have 7 at production level. The project enhanced inspector visibility. It provided us with relevant equipment and uniforms. So some of the lessons we've learned, just picked a few of them. Increased farmer interface with regulators enhances compliance. We've been able to show a few pictures there, and we can see production and compliance improving in the sector. But we realize that there is low female participation in the sector. Most of the female workers involved in this sector are involved at the parking facility, and they only do sorting and parking. In the trainings that we conducted, we had about 18% turn up of women who own gardens that produce for export. And for export level, the percentage is about 35. So there is a very low participation by women. And we believe because fruits and vegetables are a quick earning sector, every 3 months, one can earn. So it seems the men are more active in that area. And our goal is to encourage women to get more involved and own businesses in the sector. It is important that regulators should constantly make available simplified SPS market requirements. As we earlier mentioned, SPS is a bit complicated in terminology. So once you simplify the requirements and make it easy for somebody to understand, it enhances their comprehension. Of course, translations are key. Now we use them a lot, even in our training. We use both English and the various native languages. Uniforms were very important because now we've increased visibility. The project enhanced also our capacity. We got personal protective equipment, but also we wanted to point out the issue of uniforms, because once you stop somebody from doing whatever they're doing, and you dress just like them, it's difficult for you, to press the point home. But once they know you're in uniform, that means you're empowered and you're everywhere. This we've seen has helped in compliance levels. At the onset of the project, we went for an option of creating a project management steering committee, which included both public and private sector. And this we learned from the previous flower project. This helps in inclusiveness and collaboration. We plan together, we design the activities together, we review together, we inform the future together. This helped in bonding. It helped in the private sector understanding our roles, and compliance levels improved. In this project, we've learned that though we may have initiatives that we develop, it is important to be sensitive to what is going on in the environment. Whatever will enhance your project, it's good to work together. And many of the other projects that are ongoing, that are not SDF projects, have learned from this. And we are also continuing now to work together. We realize that if you're focusing on number one, I'll be focusing on number two, but together we have the same objective. Working together with the private sector has enhanced appreciation of the NPPO roles. This was also something that we learned from the flower sector, and this we've observed again in the fruits and vegetables sector. But of course, private sector self-regulation is key because it complements the inspector numbers, which are low. Once they know what they're supposed to do, why they're supposed to do it, and they know why you're supposed to do what you're doing, why you're supposed to do it, it helps them come alongside you and create that self-regulation mechanism. So with that, we've been able to form an apex body that not only includes exporters of fruits and vegetables, it includes farmers, packaging, airline, input dealers, and this we think is a very good output and impact of the project. We have a few recommendations for the SDDF. We are not only SDDF, all development partners. We are very, very grateful for the support so far. However, we think it would be helpful if we could also focus on investing in heavy and light SPS infrastructure. You can see that picture. The NPPO staff are very well, smartly dressed, but you can see the environment we're working in. And we know the commodity SPS integrity is affected along the value chain. So we think it would be helpful to also cater for the environments for both public and private sector. And actually in our law, the private sector is supposed to create an environment where we come and deliver a service. So private sector needs support in that area. Also, we need to look at supporting apex sector associations because some of our countries don't have that huge wage bill for staff. We have ceilings for staff recruitments. But once we have organized apex associations who know what they have to do with codes of practices, then we come alongside them and we are aware that private sector standards are taking even a higher precedent now. So it's critical to support apex sector associations. We are very happy that we implemented the eFITO. It has enhanced our operations. It has reduced the cost of doing business by the private sector. It has enhanced our capacity. Our signatures, our documents are now approved by trading partners, but we realize that many countries are not yet on eFITO. So if we are to transmit this electronically, we need all of us to be on eFITO. And hopefully one day we'll also have e-import permits. We also realize that trading partners more than ever before require traceability mechanisms. They require governments to prove that they know the exact source of the commodity. And we know the reasons why. These are important, and we agree. But we need to support the development of the national systems. The national systems form the backbone, the background or the backbone for the eFITO to work. If I'm to approve anything on the eFITO, I need to be sure of where it came from. Was it inspected? Did it comply to the export conditions? Or if somebody is sending me cargo, did it comply with my import requirements as Uganda? So this is something that we are requesting for. Then we need to target more women in export. But also we suggest that we could possibly look at short-term research in SPS, because I'm aware that the SCDF does not support research as such, but there are sometimes pests that are stubborn, that need quick, short-term, maybe 2-season research to see what would be the most effective way to manage it, especially in these times when we have MRL non-compliance and the climate change is not helping. As I come to a conclusion, all STDF projects require that the beneficiary contribute something to the funding. We were very lucky for this project. The Royal Netherlands Embassy came on board. It co-funded the project. Government of Uganda co-funded mainly in staff time, premises, venues. But we felt moving forward that it was critical for government to show its commitment in this area of SPS. So we lobbied as a department, the head of department lobbied, and government was able to give us an almost approximate 8 million USD for a 5 year, for 5 years. So now we are happy that any other project within STDF or any other development partner will be able to co-fund using this budget. But also, the STDF projects require us to prove that we have put in mechanisms for sustainability of the interventions that we have done in the projects. So we had to think about this, and as we implemented the project, we needed to start scanning the environment to make sure that we bring partners on board and our own skills that we have learned to further this very good project. So we are happy to report that the European Union agreed to scale up the activities of this project and are injecting in 8 million euro for the fruits and vegetable sector to fund public and private sector. There are other projects going on, Hotimap, TechnoServe. Then the UK Export Finance project is coming on board. We'll get a portion. Initially, we were trying hard for it to be ours, but the president realized that it had to be expanded to various commodities and sectors. So we will have a bit of that. Then private sector, I've already talked about it, sustainability, this is the way to go. We have to make sure that they are able to regulate themselves. We have other projects from the USAID Feed the Future, Institutional System Strengthening Activity, USAID Trade in Agriculture Safely and Efficiently, TRACE. And then we have now the private sector, now more than ever before, have realized the importance of SPS, the importance of working together with the NPPOs to lobby together. Now we are working together. And we have the Presidential Round Investors Table. These are investors who lobby the president. But then we also have now finally brought the politicians on board. And the president has given us a coordinating office together with the Office of the Prime Minister and Ministry of Trade. I think the environment is better. We are working together. Lastly, we want to thank all those partners without whom we wouldn't have been able to achieve the improvements in this sector. The STDF, the Royal Netherlands Embassy. The EU is an interesting support. Probably they don't know, but actually, I'll give you an example. When we're trying to streamline the sector, making sure there's compliance, communication, we would write to the EU DG Sante and tell it, this is the list of all approved exporters. If you see any other apart from this list, intercept. So we worked together. They don't know, but we appreciate that support. We're able to improve the sector. Then also I want to mention NPPO Kenya, which the project supported us to go benchmark a lot of improvements in the sector that we're not able to mention today, but also NPPO Tanzania, which supported us in developing the phytosanitary manuals and inspection SOPs. Thank you very much.
Wow, what a project. That's an incredible amount of work in effectively 3 years. So pretty exciting, plenty of issues for us to dive into, but we might go now to our final presenter, Koa, and then we'll take questions from the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Khoa Le from Vietnam, and thank you very much for giving Vietnam, my country, such a great opportunity to share the story of the project, STDF project related to with peppercorn production in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. So I'm here to just tell you about the story that we made for 2.5 years. Just the project for like a 3-year project. So it's already almost there. And with like a 1 year, more than 1 years of COVID pandemic. So we still have to coping all of the difficulty to run the project and to multiple or to multiply or also to spread all of the impact of project, not just in Vietnam, but also for the partners of like Laos and Cambodia. So the project is pushing the food safety and market access for the peppercorn value chain in Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia. So yes, as you may know about the peppercorn we use every day is mostly come from Vietnam. Vietnam is the biggest producer and also biggest exporter of peppercorn. And the most important thing is that the capacity of peppercorn producing in Vietnam is only below the peppercorn that Vietnam export, which means where's the rest of peppercorn come from? It comes from Cambodia and Laos, but it's simply informal peppercorn because we don't have many records, and also we have the pulse powders with Laos and Cambodia, and something like the smuggling, the farmer bring peppercorn from Laos and Cambodia to Vietnam, and Vietnam, it's very difficult to have like the traceability of the origin of where peppercorn comes from. So that is the problem. And also some issue of SPS as well that link to the informal peppercorn from Laos and Cambodia to Vietnam. So the project STDF PG 619 funded by STDF, we try to solve some problem related to with peppercorn producing in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. So so far, the preparation of before the project, we figured out some the problem existing in the peppercorn production in 3 countries. So it was a limitation of good practices, which is about good agricultural practices, the good harvesting practices, and also good management practices in storing peppercorn as well. So the other problem is poor farming management or overused pesticide and fertilizers. Now it still exists in Laos and Cambodia and some parts of Vietnam. And also the most important thing is we need more technical assistance from the developed country, like the lack of quality of planting materials, which is contaminated, a virus problem that the farmer is difficult to control virus. So we need like the high quality of planting material for peppercorn, not just only in Vietnam, but also for Laos and Cambodia as well. And after harvesting peppercorn, we also facing to the problem of potential mycotoxin, such as ATO and also aflatoxin as well. Yes, some case, but not the huge problem yet, but that still the potential of mycotoxin. And also the traceability of the original of peppercorn as well, which is still exist now in Vietnam. So I said like the gap is still being a big gap, not just within in Vietnam, many like ethnic group in Vietnam, but also between 3 countries, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia as well. So the good agricultural practices still a big gap for those 3 countries and also within Vietnam. With the approval of STDF, we have a chance to be able to enhance the SPS awareness, not just in Vietnam, but also the other two countries. And also, we have tried to strengthen the collaboration between three countries to help each other in the government level, the district level, and also the farmer level as well. So to be able to spread the good agricultural practices for a sustainable development of peppercorn production, and also to enhance the environmental condition as well, for protect the human health from the some toxic pesticide, or even the shortage of water problem as well. We try to reduce of using water during the dry season in south of Vietnam, which is now it become the real problem there, not just for peppercorn, but also for coffee production as well. So the story about Vietnam, and especially my organization, the WASI, stand for Western Highland Agricultural Science Institutes, which responsibility to do the studies on coffee and peppercorn, and then transfer all of the advanced technology to the farmer in Vietnam. With the STDF project, this STDF project, we were able to transfer the knowledge and skill to the farmer and to the staff in Cambodia and Laos. And all of the advanced technology, we create the course we call the course of practice in peppercorn production. Then this one already created with the book that not just written in Vietnamese, but also we already translated to Khmer of Cambodian language, and also to Laos language as well, for the farmer in those two countries be able to learn and to gain the skill and knowledge of good agricultural practices in peppercorn production. With some studies we doing in the past, we try to develop the sector of peppercorn in Vietnam more sustainably and more like a greenly. We call like regenerative agriculture, which is we try to convince the farmer to diversify their own farm, which is in terms of like intercropping, not just only peppercorn only. In the past 10 years ago, the Vietnamese farmers apply only monoculture of peppercorn or coffee, but now they can learn and to intercrop coffee and peppercorn together to be able to develop their both product of coffee and peppercorn more sustainably, and to protect the environment. Some of them, they apply the cover crop like the picture on the top, you can see, and to make their farm become more green, and they hope they can gain some CO2 credit later if we can trading the CO2 credit. That what we inspire the farmer in Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia to produce peppercorn more sustainably. And at Melvin mentioned before about the 3P. We already have the strong policy between private sector and public sector. Like us, the Research Institute, we represent the government body in Central Highlands of Vietnam to be able to do the research, to transfer the result to the farmer, and also the partner, the private partner. We have Nespai in terms of peppercorn, Simico, Vietpap, McCormick, and Sam, etc. Many private companies, they involve in the 3P network to have the farmer. They apply the small team of the farmer with the farmer leader who can gain the knowledge and skill easily, and then transfer back to their farmer group at FFS school, via FFS school, to help each other to share the knowledge that they gain from the government and from the public sector as well. So that's something we already share it and transfer to the partner of Cambodia and Laos to have the farmer there, to have the government of Laos and Cambodia to produce peppercorn more safer that Vietnam may have pre the processed border. So we really hope that we could not control the smuggling well. Then we just had the farmer there, the knowledge and skill, the good knowledge, good skill, good practices in produce peppercorn, and in order to get the good quality of peppercorn later on. So that is the history of peppercorn in Vietnam right now. And we really hope that in the future, not just only Vietnamese government, but also the government of Laos and Cambodia should maintain the SPS compliance in peppercorn production. And also the government need to have like a how I say, like fork to the Ministry of Education to put the SPS issue into the education system to train not just only the student, but also to have like the vocal training for farmer as well, to understand more about the issue of SPS problem within 3 countries, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. And also, I hope that with the support from STDF, we can develop the capacity of tracing the good original of peppercorn in Vietnam, to be not for us, but also for the global consumer to know about the original of their peppercorn they are consuming every day. So most important thing, we are encourage the farmer in all 3 countries to get more the green development of peppercorn, to be able to have a safer peppercorn, to be able to stable their income as well. So I think that's all about thing I would love to share with you here. And again, thank you very much for giving Vietnam such a great opportunity to share the history here with you under the project just running for 2.5 years, and 6 months more we will complete this project and will have more results updated on the STDF website. So more technical thing you can have their own updated in on the website of STDF. Again, thank you very much for listening to my story. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Koa. 3 fantastic presentations, 3 real on the ground projects that STDF has supported, developed, and really at the heart of what Group 5 is all about, looking to support developing countries and less developed countries to improve capacity building and to engage in trade and of course get all the fantastic benefits. So we've got time for questions. I'll look to the floor for questions, please. See the flag of Canada.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the three presentations. I find, much like yesterday, there's just so much information in there. It's hard to kind of unpack it all in a few minutes. Interesting, you know, 3 projects related to the STDF, 3 projects related to pests and pesticides. I did find some similarities to the presentations yesterday in that they're talking about technology. In this case, it relates to seed and pesticides, the importance of training and information sharing, and such as languages or, you know, reaching the producer. The adaptation to individual circumstances I find interesting as well, particularly smuggling, which is not an issue so much for Canada as it is for others. So interesting. And also finally, you know, the need or the initiative being driven by the need to access international markets or being inhibited from accessing international markets. I do have a question on sustainability, not so much the whether the crops are produced sustainably, but whether these initiatives are sustainable in terms of often some projects are started, it goes well until the funding runs out, and then it kind of goes back to where it was before. And I don't think that's the case in these 3 examples. But my question for all of the presenters is, what is needed to make this work sustainable? You know, in terms of, you know, for example, in the case of peppercorns, it might be, you know, ensuring access of quality seed, or it might be, you know, commitment by the government or whatever. But I am curious in terms of what you feel individually would be the you know, the key factors that would ensure the success of these initiatives. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Canada. I don't see any other flags in the room at this stage, but I know we have Ecuador online. Go ahead, please.
Buenos días, muy buenas tardes, saludos desde Ecuador, desde la Agencia de Regulación y Control Fitosanitario. Si bien es cierto, esta intervención no está enfocada en hacer un interrogante, no queríamos dejar pasar la oportunidad, Ecuador no quería dejar pasar esta oportunidad para agradecer las iniciativas que se han llevado a cabo por el STDF, beneficio principalmente de países que producimos cultivos menores. Ecuador se ha sumado recientemente a estas iniciativas que nos han ayudado a adquirir capacidades para la generación de datos. Ecuador no desarrolla límites máximos de residuos, por lo que nosotros los adoptamos principalmente del Códex. Sin embargo, esto no descarta que la generación de datos para conseguir determinar un límite máximo de residuos debe hacerse en cultivos o en pruebas o en ensayos con diferentes condiciones agroecológicas. Entonces, para que obviamente este límite máximo de residuos sea representativo y que proteja al consumidor y que facilite el comercio. Antes de colaborar con las iniciativas que nombró Verónica Picado en la primera intervención, hubiese sido muy difícil para poder realizar estas actividades, que valga comentar, es la primera vez que en nuestra historia como república hemos podido colaborar con la generación de datos, que no es una tarea fácil. Ya hemos completado.
Interrupt you there. Apologies. We're just having a little trouble hearing you. The interpreters are having trouble. Do you have a microphone that you can add? Or potentially, if that's problematic, you could put it into the chat.
Sí, muchas gracias. Entonces estaría haciendo el comentario a través del chat. Saludos.
Thank you very much. We'll come back to you. I see Indonesia online, and then I'll come back to the room.
Is it okay? Yeah, thank
Yes,
you.
please go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Good presentation, the project, implementation of project under STDF sorry. So I just see how's the running of the project, how they work for implementation of the standards, particularly in plant health. So to fulfill the import requirement for that. So I wondering that for sustainability of the process after they get the capacity, particularly the product had be really fulfill the requirement. The problem is who will be buying that product itself continuously, to guarantee that farmers can, having support from the government, from other country to sustain the commodity can buy the every years of that one. So this means that the farmers can happy they have continuously the producing the commodity, and there are market access is already available and continuously to fulfill the market itself. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Indonesia. In the room, I noticed first the flag of the United States and then Ayika. Thank you.
Thanks, and thanks to all the presenters for sharing their experience with us. This is exactly the sort of exchange and feedback I think the group was looking for when we contemplated this this session. The question I have is perhaps a bit of a question and maybe a request to the second speaker regarding experiences around ePhyto, and specifically the sort of recognition or acknowledgement that ePhyto is a strong tool, and that were more countries to adopt ePhyto, that would have positive trade impacts for Uganda and for lots of other countries. I guess that's something that the IPPC and countries have been working on for some time, and I don't know if through this project perhaps there are lessons learned or things that your country has picked up that could be shared. And as we were talking about it at the table here, I was saying, perhaps for other developing countries, and my colleague said, probably for all countries, because it seems as though uptake on, ePhyto is still something that, while there has been quite a bit of it, there's still quite a bit of space to go. And so it's really positive to hear the experience of Uganda. And I think either under the umbrella of the STDF or, somewhere else, if there is an ability to share some of those best practices or lessons learned, or really anything that could help all sorts of, or all WTO members with their adoption of the ePhyto system, I think that would be a really welcome to use the parlance spillover effect of this project. Thanks.
Thanks, United States. Ayika.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to express Ayika's gratitude for the STDF support to the biopesticides project. This project addresses a very practical and relevant issue for the Americas, and we are very excited to be part of it. Also, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the long history of joint work and support to Latin America and Caribbean countries and to Ayika initiatives in those regions. Thanks for the overall support, STDF. Over to you, Madam Chairman.
Thanks so much. So I think that's it for the questions. So we'll turn now to our fantastic panel. We might go in order. So Veronica, I'll pass to you first to answer the questions. Thank you.
Bueno, me voy a referir a la pregunta de la sostenibilidad, pues consideramos que principalmente se ocupa un apoyo político permanente. Por eso los proyectos han venido trabajando articulados con los diferentes foros regionales. Me refiero al CIECA en Centroamérica, a la CAP, al Consejo de Agricultura Centroamericano, a la CAM en la región andina. También se ocupa el desarrollo de capacidades, por eso estamos estableciendo un centro de formación en el idioma que se utiliza principalmente en toda la región, que es el español, articulando o creando espacios con alianzas estratégicas con universidades, un fortalecimiento institucional y obviamente alianzas público-privado.
Thank you, Chair. The question on sustainability is very, very important. And we gave it much thought during the project design, because we didn't want to be part of something that is talked about, that happened, but we wanted these initiatives to continue forever, because the sector is here, it's not going anywhere. It impacts on the livelihoods of almost the majority of Ugandans. Almost every home has an avocado tree, a mango tree, vegetables. So it's very important for the export sector, but also for the domestic food safety sector. So that's why we made sure as a department, we lobby government. Right now, the horticulture sector is a prior subsector. It has been given the due recognition. That's why we were able to get a development project from government, Ministry of Finance, to inject in this money. And we are working together with the other ministries, departments, and agencies to make sure that we lobby for more money, but also get on board development partners for this particular sector, because we've realized that the fruits and vegetables sector is a sector that can turn around the economy in a short while. We benchmarked from Kenya, where it has overtaken coffee. We're priding in coffee, cotton, tea, the traditional cash crops, but now this is a major new sector. We have been assured of demand from our trading partners as long as we can comply to the standards. So those are some of the answers I can give you now, but we are committed to this sector. I'm not so sure, Melvin, whether we should be bringing up the e-FITO now.
Yes.
Okay. For Uganda, we will make sure we continue encouraging member states to join e-FITO. We presented this to the ESC. Now all the East African countries are working hard to make sure that they join. Kenya is on board, and the rest of the other countries are coming on. And we need to mention that we had another project that wanted to help in that area, but it didn't take off because the requirements to set up e-FITO in that project were high. We needed a lot of human resource. We needed technology, we needed training, we needed equipment. But with e-FITO, it was different. It was different because the IPPC lifted that bulk from us. And they developed it very, very fast. Within 6 months, we are ready to go. We're piloting. We piloted with this sector, then the flower sector, then we rolled it out. Within 6 months, it was a requirement for all exporters to be on e-FITO. We made sure that the head of department lobbied first the ministry top policy, then lobbied government, then handed it over to us, the administrators. So it is not expensive because the IPPC lifts the bulk of the development of the program. When there are problems, the turnaround time is between an hour to 2 maximum, and rarely does it get to that. But initially we had challenges with the system we had tried to do, where it would take 6 months, even a year, without solutions being, gotten, and traders needed, the documents. So it was not really good. But with e-FITO, you just have to hook up your data and your laptop or your phone, and you're ready to go. The other time we had to procure document certificates, and the procurement processes were bureaucratic, taking a very long time. Sometimes the papers would run out and we didn't have the money to procure, to start the process. But with this, if we are all on e-FITO, you're done away with hard copies, you transmit securely the documents, you reduce the documentation non-compliances, and you can have only one IT staff to support. That's what we are doing. You don't need a team because IPPC lifts the bulk of the challenge. Those are the few I could give now. Thank you.
So regarding the question of the sustainability, in my opinion, I would say that I truly believe the term of sustainable in producing peppercorn in Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia now become more and more sustainable, and it can be maintained quite well. As in Vietnam, the cost of production that's already created and translated from Vietnamese to Cambodian and Laos. In Vietnam, the COP, cost of practices, already placed in the Agricultural Extension Center of Vietnam. And the director of center already agreed that the cost will be placed in the agenda that agricultural extension do every year to have a farmer. And also for the private sector, we also offer that cost practices to some peppercorn companies such as Simeco, SAM, Vietpep. They can use that code to have their own farmers to produce peppercorn more sustainably. And we also, Vietnam also recommend Laos and Cambodian team do the same way to apply those cost practices to have the farmer in those two countries as Vietnam is doing now. So that's all I would love to say about my opinion in terms of sustainability. Thanks.
Thank you so much to our panel. Everyone, please join me in thanking our panel after this first one round. So we're going to take a short break while Koa, Brenda and Veronica change over, and we have a second panel, and we're going to welcome Marlon from STVF, who will be the moderator for this second panel session. So we've got about a minute to stretch your legs and get ready for round two. Okay, colleagues, I'll draw your attention back to the room. We're going to start our second panel session. And to colleagues who are online, thank you for waiting for us as we got ourselves organized. So I'd like to start by introducing Marlon from STDF, who is going to moderate this session, and I'll let her introduce our esteemed panelists. So our first session was really about the practical STDF projects on the ground, the benefits, the lessons learned. And this one, we're going to have more of a discussion about how can we work on those learnings, how can we share the benefits, and of course, what are the real opportunities. So right now I'll hand over to Marlon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joe. And thank you to everyone in the room and everyone who's joining us online for this session. And as you mentioned, Joe, the focus now is to move from those very inspiring project stories and examples to take a deep dive and to try to better understand STDF's knowledge work and thinking about how the knowledge work can also be used to inform and support your work in the SPS committee in terms of the implementation of the SPS agreement and also being in a better situation to address those emerging and those new challenges that are really relevant for the future as identified in the MC12 declaration. Melvin mentioned that there's knowledge work going on different topics, good regulatory practice, public-private partnership, cutting trade costs and electronic SPS certification, and using evidence to inform and prioritize SPS investments. And that knowledge work is really closely connected to and linked to the STDF projects. And the United States raised a good question about that connection and the synergy in terms of the learning about eFIDO in Uganda. And I wanted to mention that an ongoing STDF project evaluation of the STDF eFIDO project is also looking and learning from the experience in Uganda, which developed and implemented eFIDO outside of the STDF eFIDO project. So we will have an evaluation that is learning about what happened in the countries that were covered under the STDF project, as well as countries like Uganda that led that eFIDO work by themselves. The knowledge work also takes place in cooperation with members of the partnership, with our partners, with our donors, and with other members, and that really strengthens the work. And it really aims to build awareness and provide guidance and good practices for SPS committee delegates, members, and others who are developing and implementing SPS capacity building programs on the ground. So we're looking forward to a really rich and lively panel session now with representatives from the STDF's partnership. And we're looking forward to learn also from our panelists about how we can further shape and develop and adapt STDF's knowledge work moving forward. So to introduce the panelists, we have some panelists online. We have 3 panelists in the room. We have Gillian Milray, who's the head of the standards department at the World Organization for Animal Health, one of our STDF founding partners. And Gillian is also the chair of the working group at present. We have Jeremy. I'll introduce the panelists who are in the room first. We have Jeremy Knopps, who's the general delegate from COLEAD, formerly COLI ACP, and probably better known as COLI ACP, a network of companies, professional organizations, and experts committed to inclusive and sustainable agriculture. And Remco Val, sitting next to me, who's a minister councillor in the EU delegation to the World Trade Organization in Geneva. On screen, on Zoom, we have John Opong Otu, who's a coordinator on standards and trade in the Secretariat for Animal Health and Food Safety at AU-EBAR, the African Union Inter-African Bureau for Animal Resources. And lastly, but not least, we have Betsy Basinger, who's a Senior Director, Trade and Regulatory Capacity Building Division, Global Programs at the US Department of Agriculture, the Foreign Agriculture Service. So thank you so much to our panelists for joining us. And I'm going to ask some questions to the panelists, and then we will have time for comments, observations, questions from you in the audience, both in the room and on Zoom, joining virtually. So please make a note of your questions as we go through. So the first question I will ask to Gillian, because we've heard, Gillian, stories about the STDF projects and the grants and how they're helping developing countries to meet international standards that are recognized in the SPS agreement, including the standards that are set by the World Organization for Animal Health. So how do you see these projects, you know, quite small projects, quite unique projects, as supporting WOA's goal to improve animal health and welfare globally? Over to you, Gillian.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you're joining this discussion. I just to note, following on from the presentations we heard not long ago, is just noting there was an absence of any projects relating to animal health. And so just for those that are not so aware, the STDF mechanism supports projects related to plant health, food safety and animal health. And the absence of a project was no particular reason. So just to highlight that there are always PPGs, PG applications related to animal health, and indeed there's always implementation of STDF projects in animal health. To date, in the area of aquaculture, avian influenza, African swine fever, FMD feasibility studies, and others. So just to be clear that the STDF crosses the three international standard setting organizations. So in answer to your question, how these projects support WOHA's goal to improve animal health and welfare globally, I just again link back to the opening presentation from Melvin about the mission of STDF is to support developing countries to comply with international sanitary and phytosanitary requirements. And you'll all be very aware that WOA's mission is to improve animal health and welfare globally, therefore ensuring a better future for all. So the link is fairly obvious. I think that STDF grants and the WOHA mission are clearly intimately connected, so that STDF provides a mechanism to support WOHA members to implement the WOHA standards. And again, you'll probably be aware that the work of WOHA is getting more and more diverse in the complexity of the world. But at the core of our work has been and continues to be the development of WOHA international standards, which were adopted by the World Assembly of Delegates, new and revised standards each year at our general session. It's the WOHA members, so the majority of which are also WTO members, that have the responsibility to implement the WOHA standards. And the reality is that many countries need to access funding mechanisms to support capacity building activities to support that implementation. WOHA, we do provide some capacity building tools, such as the PVS pathway and other projects, but often these activities are limited by funding constraints and our own capacity and our core mandate. So the funding mechanisms like STDF are an important source of capacity building grants for specific aspects of standards implementation for WOHA members. That's really all. I guess in answer, the linkage to us is very clear and very obvious, is that any member that is the recipient of a STDF project that succeeds in implementing some aspects of their trade in animal products or live animals will support the mandate of WOHA. So I would finish by simply encouraging members to become familiar with STDF mechanism and encourage the submission of animal health related PPGs and PGs because as I've just mentioned, any projects that support the implementation of WOHA standards will contribute to WOHA's mission to improve animal health and welfare globally. And after all, WOHA is not me, it's not headquarters, it is actually all of you, the 182 members who are members of WOHA, of which by far the majority are also WTO members. So thank you.
Thanks, Gillian. And definitely you mentioned that there were no animal health stories shared, but there are examples on the STDF website of projects that have addressed animal health challenges facing trade, or feasibility studies looking into the costs and PPP type options to address issues related to foot and mouth disease control in Southern Africa, aquaculture production and trade from Peru, and African swine fever are just some examples of those ongoing STDF projects or completed project preparation grants. I'm hoping now that we have you, John, online in the AU EBAR, which is a nice link also to what Gillian spoke about. Veronique shared, John, and you have been listening to the previous session, experiences about the STDF pesticide MRL project in Latin America, which led to the establishment of the Global Minor Use Foundation, which has also been really key in sustaining and institutionalizing the sustainability of those regional projects into something that is ongoing and that will continue into the future. AU EBAR was involved in a similar regional project in Africa, and you were involved in that personally, John, in Africa. So could you tell us a little bit about the key benefits and lessons of the MRL project in Africa, and what's been happening since in Africa to keep that project and to keep the sustainability going and to build on that work? Thanks, John. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Marlene, and greetings from Nairobi. It's a good evening here, but I greet you all, and thanks very much to the STDF for inviting the African Union to contribute to this very important discussion. So yes, Marlene, you are right. The project that you talk about relates to the generation of data to set pesticide maximum residue limit. And the compound we were looking at was sulfoxaflor in mango. The countries that were engaged in this regional project included Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Senegal, and Ghana. So Africa is mostly agrarian. We do a lot of agricultural produce trade. These agricultural produce must meet important SPS requirements, one of which is maximum residue levels for pesticides. Countries do not always have the capacity to set or comply with these pesticide residue limits. And so what the project sought to do was to build the capacities of the beneficiary countries to enable them generate data and submit to the joint expert meeting on pesticide residue. And so the MRLs has eventually been established for sulfoxaflor. I think the key benefits that we had from this project included the fact that the capacity building. So we realized that in order to generate the data, we needed to build the competencies of the lab technicians, but also in areas, building the competencies on the soft skills, good laboratory practices. And so these really helped them to gain the core competencies, and we're privileged to have experts from the JMPR, from the University of Rutgers, and other experts to train our personnel. And since then, these personnel have moved on to become leaders themselves, and so we are seeing more of them being deployed to other countries in the continent to also now build the competence of our member states. The other issue that I would like to highlight relates to the cooperation. the benefit of cooperation. So usually during this pesticide data generation work, the countries need to collaborate on data collection, on sampling, on testing, and there are occasionally times when the analytical work may not go as planned in a particular country, and you may have to ship the samples for testing to another country. So really it reinforced the concept of cooperation amongst the government, but not just the government. We had the involvement of the private sector. So for example, the Mango Producers Association of Ghana, we had the Tanzania Horticultural Association, all working together with government to produce the necessary data to support the pesticide residue work. What are we doing since then? Using the capacities that we have built within the countries.
John? Oh,
yes,
sorry. Just to speak a little closer to the mic so that the interpreters can hear. Sorry to interrupt.
All right, okay. So using the capacities that has been built over the years, we are now seeing situations where neighboring countries are sending their personnel to these laboratories, if you like, reference laboratories to be trained. And it's an important PM learning and networking mechanism for the continent. Additionally, we also have started a project on passion fruit and coffee to establish MRLs for sulfoxaflor in passion fruit and in Bepsicap in coffee. Again, building on the competencies that already exist. So in summary, Marlon, what we have seen is that compliance tend to be improved when countries are involved in the actual establishment of the standard, because we are integrating the practices, the good practices from the countries, and really we would like to commend the STDF, the USDA Foreign Agricultural Service, the Rutgers University, and all the other partners that supported to roll out this program.
Thank you so much, John. And I think, yeah, you highlighted several of the points that were already mentioned before, including on cooperation, networks, collaboration, public-private, and really demand-driven and active country-driven, country-led processes for better sustainability. Let me turn to you now, Betsy, also online, because the USDA has provided quite a bit of technical expertise to these STDF projects, including the MRL projects, but also to knowledge work on topics like PIMA's evidence-based approach to prioritize SPS investments. So what's the USDA interest in this collaboration, and how are you using some of these good practices and knowledge products to support your own programs with governments in developing countries?
Great, thank you. Thank you, Marlon, for the opportunity to join the panel, and it's good to see so many familiar faces. USDA is deeply committed to working with countries to strengthen their sanitary and phytosanitary policy and regulatory systems in line with the SPS agreement, because this is essential to the integrity of our global food systems and to international trade. A key component for success in SPS capacity building is collaboration. Several years ago at USDA, we mapped out the components to a successful project, and it basically boiled down to collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. So every day we work with a range of partners, including the STDF, Codex, the World Organization for Animal Health, IPPC, FAO, World Bank, and regional bodies such as the African Union, IECA, APEC, ASEAN, CABI, as well as a wide range of local partners in country. It's nice to see some of your partners here at the table, and all of our work is we all work closely in a variety of projects, sharing knowledges and best practices with a shared goal of strengthening SPS and increasing trade. Success comes when we're able to identify local needs and gaps and fill them with the knowledge cataloged through the years of experience by regional and international organizations, such as the STDF. and the others that I've just mentioned. Only through collaboration that brings about mutual understanding of how local systems and practices relate to national or regional systems and then up to the global system can we achieve the goal of harmonizing standards and practices. There's no simple way to bring about a fully functioning and integrated global SPS system. If there was, there'd be no SPS committee and none of us would be here today. While we here in the room live and breathe the SPS agreement daily, those affected back home are not as aware of it as we are, or the relationship between their work in the fields, in the laboratories, at the borders, in the ministries to the SPS agreement. And that's where capacity building comes in. We've made great progress over the years, but there's still much to be done to raise awareness, increase understanding, gain acceptance, and see adoption of best practices. We value the STDF, which is why the United States is a consistent donor. With all the donor countries and member organizations pooling our resources and our expertise, the reach of what we can do collectively far exceeds what we can do individually. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Betsy. And I think that's, collaboration is really key, and collaboration is taking place in the STDF's knowledge work, in the working group, in the global platform, as well as in the projects and the PPGs. So let me turn to you now, Jeremy. And of course, within the STDF partnership, CoLead is very actively engaged, including in the implementation of projects in Cameroon, Togo, and Guinea, where you're working in partnership with regulatory authorities, local industry associations, micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, and farmers. So could you share some of the key learnings emerging from your work in those places, please?
Thank you, Marlene. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody from wherever you're connecting. And thank you again for the invitation and opportunity to participate in the panel. So I'll try to share here a couple of insights. Nothing will be totally revolutionary after having heard a number of elements already shared this afternoon, but I'll just try to bring maybe the perspective from yes, as you said, Marlene, an implementing organization. By nature, we're a private sector, not-for-profit organization. So we're managing, yes, as you mentioned, 3 STDF projects, but also a range of other programs funded by donors, amongst which the EU is the most important one to date. Number one in our case, it has been just mentioned right now. We have learned over the past 20 years that there needs to be, from the design phase of these interventions, a substantial investment in terms of the contextualization of the intervention, the appropriate sizing and scoping. And so can be referred to as an intervention adapted to the local context. What do we mean by that? Through the STDF projects, if we take these 3 projects, it's a kind of value chain approach or intervention. So we look at a specific product, and the idea is, of course, to have an overall impact in terms of interceptions when the product is exported to the EU, but beyond, I would say, exports to the EU. But it's a value chain approach. So at the start, there needs to be really this analysis of what are the dynamics within that value chain. What are the dynamics between each group, but within each group of stakeholders? So it was referred to as a common denominator from the previous interventions, the importance of having these relationships being built, but how really are structured the relationships between the competent authorities within the competent public sector group, within the private sector players, within academia research, within civil society. Just to take an example, I mean, in each one of these projects, Cameroon, Togo, Guinea, to just name those, but we work across 50 countries, so in a range of value chains. But each and every one of these value chains had a different type of configuration when analyzed into detail. When it came to what type of companies do we have in front of us, what type of producer groups, how is the value chain dominated or structured? These are fundamental elements from the start to have a key understanding on that part, because it depends on there's of course the subsequent element of sizing, scoping appropriately, and really adapting to the kind of overall capacity to absorb support. And this relates also to a comment that was mentioned in terms of overall sustainability of interventions. Number two, the building, of course, of these internal and external partnerships. Once we have the kind of granular understanding of how a specific value chain is structured, how it's organized, what type of players on the private sector side, how are the competent authorities structured, and it will be different in each case when it gets down to what type of personality, what type of people are managing different services. Once we have that, it's of course a question of having a common language, a common understanding of making sure people understand each other, can speak to each other. It's the most complex part by far from our experience. And without any guarantee of success. We are in an area where it involves, of course, less rational elements, scientific, and we are in an area where human interactions play a big role. And in that area, again, it's a question of being able to adapt and find the best way to have this engagement. When we try to categorize it as the kind of internal partnership building and external partnership building. When I say internal partnership building, of course, this can be said in different ways, but with the two dominant usually parties, the public and private group of stakeholders being able to interact, have the common understanding, and then the external, it's with all the other programs, projects, agencies, stakeholders also active in a similar field. Why on the internal side is it so important? Again, coming back to the sustainability of interventions, if there's not this mutual understanding, common language, usually there'll be a lack of trust, potentially issues then around the governance, the overall governance of the value chain, leading to problems in terms of ownership, accountability, etc. That's based on, again, on our experience. Number three, on the capacity building side, I mean, it's one of the raison d'etre of our organizations as our vision. I mean, it's emphasizing and putting almost all the efforts on skills, competencies, information. It's about growing people. Now, one of the elements we need to continuously work upon and continuously improve, of course, we have different types of training or capacity building activities, focusing more on the technical side of things, focusing more on the pedagogical elements. What we need to better understand, we believe, as an organization in the context of our programs, is how in the long run are at an individual level, how are we going to have the right mindset for continuous learning, because these are complex issues which change quite regularly, and how at a collective sector level we have, again, the right understanding of who's providing what types of services when it comes to training, being publicly or privately funded, and how can we then act upon the right levers to make sure to invest very strategically some scarce resources, because there's a scarcity of resources for everybody overall. Number four, and lastly, as an organization, what has been quite important, I mean, for us managing these programs, of course, is the capacity to regularly monitor, follow up what's going on, and having the capacity to adapt. And we might not have everything right in the first place, and we need this continuous engagement with stakeholders directly impacted and directly working on the project to be able to readapt, having the flexibility to readjust because of internal or external factors that might be arising over the course of the project. So that will be it at this stage.
Thank you so much for that, Jeremy. And I think, yeah, you talk about, the need for continuous learning. And I think that's key, also related to the SPS declaration, the complexity, the changes, the evolving risks, the new challenges, and having that mindset for continuous learning. It's also something within the knowledge work of the STDF we're trying to do, and we're grateful for Collie ACP's or COLLEAD's contribution in terms of the PPP practitioner group to learn from those cases on the ground. Even if there's no one size fits all, we can pull out some common threads, some experiences that can be relevant, and that same learning is taking place within the practitioner group on electronic certification in the STDF too. So I think with that, Remco, lastly but not least for this round, the SPS delegation aims to respond to those modern SPS challenges, including the importance of sustainable agriculture practices and production systems, as well as, climate change, biodiversity, the cross-cutting issues. Also, gender equality is not mentioned in the SPS declaration, but it is a cross-cutting topic that the STDF is working on. So how do you see this in terms of, the future?
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Well, let me start by saying that we very much value the STDF's work on cross-cutting thematic topics in convening STDF partners, in drawing on their technical expertise, and in enhancing SPS capacity more broadly. And can I just add that we in particular appreciate the intention you have for 2023 to carry out an assessment of the STDF's work on the environment, on biodiversity and climate change. And I think this will help evaluate how to address environmental aspects in STDF projects and SPS capacity development. Now, if I may, we believe there's room to enhance the STDF's role in two ways, perhaps, and they you'll see they turn around sustainability and innovation. So first, we think back of the evaluation in 2019 of the STDF. It highlighted that given your relatively small budget, on the one hand, and the global leadership position in trade and SPS on the other hand, that the STDF should focus its activities on innovative deliverables and that add value. In other words, leave the more routine SPS capacity building activities to others. So now one major area in which there's a lot of room to learn and to innovate, it strikes us, is precisely sustainable agricultural practices, and also the link between climate change and SPS. So an aside, in May 2022, I believe, there was the Climate Change Week, very relevant initiative, but we think the STDF could really adopt a leadership role in this area of what I'd call sustainable food systems. And furthermore, in the future, to ensure sustainability results, the SPS interventions should be aligned with what's called the One Health approach, which means recognizing the links between human health, animal health, and the environment. Now, that's all really. Just one thing, because others in this room may be better placed, but it strikes me that the experience of the STDF is relevant, not just to thematic group 5, but also to thematic group number 1. So on that note, thanks.
Thanks so much, Remco. And I think, yeah, very interesting also that you ended with the relevance to thematic group number 1. I understand that yesterday there was a great workshop here with a lot of experience sharing about how also producers, private sector are starting to think about sustainability and implementing sustainability in their practices. So one question can also be, you know, are the regulators keeping up to date or keeping up to speed with that, I think, maybe for the audience.
separately. So let's move to you, Gillian, for a second question. We'll just have another round of questions. I'll ask the panelists to please keep to maybe 2-3 minutes each so that we have some time for Q&A from the floor. Gillian, it's really, you know, WOA, World Organization for Animal Health, you're collaborating, you're engaging with us on STDF knowledge work from PPPs, ESERT, good regulatory practice, and so on. So how do you see the value of this work for WOA, and what opportunities do you see for its wider dissemination and uptake? Thanks.
Thank you very much for the question. I guess just hearing some of the other perspectives today is just realizing that we're all faced by the challenges of more and more information and the complexity of the work that we're each doing. And so it's been said by Betsy and other speakers, the word collaboration. So there is this need for us to, I think the key for success of any of our missions is to ensure that we're collaborating with the right people, with the relevant stakeholders. And no better example than that is the global pandemic. So for us, and for me personally, the value of the STDF knowledge work on cross-cutting topics, which you've just mentioned a few, provides an excellent forum for information sharing and collaboration, and particularly sharing some lessons learned. Also, there's the opportunity, it's a very open invitation for participation. So we often have a very wide range of participants, which I think often provides a diverse perspective of just the way people look at different topics or see the world. And I'd say the other opportunity is that for us, we've been able to nominate other people in the organization to participate. So it's not just me trying to represent all of these different topics. You can get someone who's specifically working in PPP or good regulatory practice to actually participate in these different forums. And also I think often it's always of value too, because sometimes you get others providing a perspective on yourself or your own organization that you're a little bit blind to. So this often adds another moment of reflection and to think a little bit more broadly. And just to finish to say, I guess that's the perspective of the people working within the WOHA headquarters, but we also do see it as the opportunity to disseminate this information to our members. And so we can promote particularly some of the outputs. So it's not, these aren't always just talking forums. There is like the guidance on good regulatory practice, the different products, so we can distribute those to our members. Thanks, Marlon.
Thanks for that, Gillian. And I think, you know, moving from that, how knowledge work can inform and support SPS capacity development at the global level, over to you, John, in Africa. How are you using STDF knowledge work on good regulatory practice, or how can that work support the SPS policy framework in Africa or efforts to facilitate trade under the AFCFTA? Over to you, John. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Marlene. So the AU SPS policy framework was developed to help implement the Annex 7 of the AFCFTA agreement. And essentially, the objective is to have SPS systems that promote safe and sustainable food to the African consumer and our partners outside Africa. An SPS system that is efficient and reduces cost. And in doing this, we will require various tools and knowledge product in order to deliver on these objectives. And I look at the good regulatory practices guideline that the STDF has developed, and really it offers an important evidence-based tool for countries to develop SPS measures that are fit for purpose. Many of our countries, because of the AFCFTA agreement, are in the process of reviewing the SPS regulations. And certainly, guidance on how to plan for regulation becomes very important. we see a situation where electronic certification will play a more important role as we continue trading amongst ourselves. And so certainly this will be important when it comes to rolling out electronic certification. And thanks a lot to the STDF, the EU, and the WA and the other partners for rolling out different activities on e-certification. It's really the way to go in terms of trade efficiency and reducing the cost of trade. And so certainly there are experiences that we can learn. There are lessons that we can learn from the ongoing projects and the projects that have been implemented. And in the view of the African Union, we are looking at a situation where these experiences and lessons are used to positively influence the uptake of this tool in other member states, but also to catalyze the uptake of all these tools in the member states. So essentially, Marlin, I think we would need a lot of partnerships in delivering these knowledge products and tools to our member states. And we thank all the partners who continue to intervene in various ways. And you listen to a friend from Uganda and the great work they are doing with the EU, the pesticide work that we are doing with the USD. And really, this is the way to go. But we need to deliver these knowledge products to the member states, and certainly learning events such as these ones and many more provide a good mechanism for doing that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, John. And I think that's, you know, for the STDF, it's wonderful to have a partner like the AU-EBAR to help us get some of these knowledge products into the hands of end users in Africa and in other developing countries, so that they can be really used and that they can add value to the work of others. So thank you for that. Remco, let me ask you another question. You know, we've talked about the challenges, the changes in the global agricultural landscape and linkages and partnerships. And you are also involved in the broader Aid for Trade agenda and work here at WTO. So how do you see that linkage and that partnership coming back to STDF's work?
Marin, before I answer your question, I just a thought on the knowledge work, because I didn't say it earlier, but we'd be really interested in discussion on how the synergies between the knowledge work and the projects could be further strengthened, because I think there's some examples also were mentioned today around biopesticides, e-certification, where we could perhaps strengthen those synergies and maximize the impact that you're having. But yeah, just had to add that to what the two speakers before me said. Now, you asked me how the European Union approaches the challenges, and that's also referred to in the SPS declaration. I'd say in three steps. First is, I have to say that sustainability, the fight against climate change and environmental degradation, but also food safety and food security, they are cornerstones of European policies related to trade and agriculture. And I would just want to mention the EU Green Deal or the Farm to Fork strategy, because they stipulate that EU trade and development cooperation policies should contribute to the global transition to a green and low carbon economy, and particular to the sustainable food systems that I mentioned earlier. So that's step one, the policy level. Then secondly, and it was also mentioned earlier, we very much acknowledge that producers in what we call third countries, non-EU countries, face production conditions and pest pressures that are different. from ours, and where operators in those countries can be put at a disadvantage, or where the development benefits that we're seeking can be put at risk, appropriate cooperation has to be provided, we feel. Capacity building, research, appropriate and affordable alternatives, they are all essential. And so we support partners in their transition towards sustainable food systems, and understanding, to stress or repeat, that one size does not fit all. So then comes step 3, which is that we have a number of programs that we finance at global, at regional, at country level, that provide this context-specific cooperation. Just wanted to, in order not to be too long, refer to the European Union's latest Aid for Trade report, published in early January, which focuses on how our Aid for Trade has fostered a green recovery and has supported sustainable and resilient food systems. And it includes a large number of case studies and project examples from around the globe. So maybe have a look. Now, zooming in on agriculture markets and including SPS aspects. So we have numerous interventions also to support partners in complying with regulatory and market requirements.
Ahora sí me escucha.
Whether it's domestic,
Okay.
or
Yo creo que yo ya
international
podría.
markets. And this, I think, is very important. It includes seizing new opportunities through green or low carbon or climate resilient strategies. And let me just mention 2 concrete examples. So we have a recent program that we call Agri-Info, because it's about enhanced data and knowledge to ensure that European Union policies measures are leveraged to benefit developing countries and avoiding unforeseen negative consequences for agricultural production or agricultural exports. And that's actually something that we're doing with CoLead. And the second example, on which I wanted to finish, also with CoLead, it's called Fit for Market Plus. We're now at the plus stage, and that supports the capacity of smallholders, farmer groups, and horticultural MSMEs in African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries to comply with, again, those regulatory and market requirements. Have I time to add something about the role of the STDF? Yes. So quickly, we consider that you have unique experience and valuable knowledge on these emerging challenges to which your question referred. And so we welcome your active participation in Working Group 5. We also think that the STDF activity is particularly relevant under the recently adopted Aid for Trade work program in this organization, because it has 3 points of focus: food security, digital, we also mentioned, and mainstreaming trade and sustainability in development strategy. So to finish, in supporting SPS improvements in partner countries, there are clear synergies between what you're doing and what we are doing directly. And the project in Uganda that was presented earlier, I think, is a very good example of this, and I'd be happy to say more about that if there's time.
Thank you so much for that, Remco. And I think, yeah, definitely, I have also been getting ideas and learning today about the synergies between the projects and the knowledge work. And I think also the example that was shared from Vietnam about how an SPS capacity development project can catalyze wider change related to environmental benefits and so on with the CO2 trading is also an interesting angle that we can bring in and learn learn from some of these projects, some of what they're doing besides the SPS capacity development in terms of the environment assessment to come. So Betsy, back to you on Zoom. If, I was wondering too, if you could speak a little bit about what the United States is doing to adapt its capacity development programs to these 21st century challenges and opportunities, and how you see the STDF's knowledge work coming in to be supportive there or to play a role. Thanks, Betsy.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again, Marlon. Well, first, I'll just reiterate that the United States remains committed to providing technical assistance on SPS issues in order to implement the SPS agreement and support members to meet their international organization or obligations and facilitate safe trade. And then I'd like to build on Jeremy's remarks. And in doing that, I'd like to challenge all of you as global experts in SPS to help us do more. When we talk about knowledge, you are the folks who understand better than anyone else in the world the relationship between SPS issues and food security, climate, economic development, and access to markets. You are in the best position to explain to others how the importance of our work is growing and how it will continue well into the foreseeable future. I ask that you work with your aid and assistance counterparts in your governments to help to recognize the importance of SPS in their work. All too often we hear of projects that help a country increase the production of a certain product with the goal of raising local incomes, only to fail with that product because it can't be traded due to SPS concerns. We in this group are the ones who can help our aid colleagues understand these issues at the project's inception. For example, in the United States, strengthened and expanded access to markets is a key component to our global food security strategy, as is the increased access to safe and nutritious foods. By including these upfront, we're saying that strengthening SPS systems will also increase and strengthen food security. All of us need to help our colleagues understand these linkages so that we can allocate appropriate resources to continue our work to strengthen systems. And this isn't just an ask for donor countries. All of us have an obligation to help explain the interlinkages of SPS with important issues at hand, so the ample attention is paid and partnerships can form that will address current and future weaknesses. And here I'd like to highlight the excellent presentations earlier, especially from my colleague from Uganda, who showed how the importance of how government there, recognizing the larger SPS picture and seeing the needs, is able to effectively coordinate between the government and donors to achieve progress. Specifically on knowledge work, the STDF, through its project preparation grants and knowledge products, serves as an incubator for innovative ideas that we can use to strengthen, scale, and apply in our programs. For example, USDA was proud to collaborate with STDF in the development of knowledge tools and guidance such as PIMA and the Good Regulatory Practice Guide for improved SPS measures. And because of this, we recognize how important these tools are for the regulators in countries as they seek to draft and implement our SPS measures and mobilize investment. We are now working to integrate these projects into our projects under the Food Safety for Food Security program in Africa and South Asia. Here, I'd also like to mention our spscourses.com. This is a free tool that USDA and USAID developed that is accessible online to everyone. spscourses.com can be used as standalone training or be combined with in-person training, and we want to thank the STDF for helping to increase awareness of these tools. The STDF should continue to serve as a place where countries can come together to discuss common needs and opportunities for applying SPS measures in the new era. We look forward to continuing our cooperation with the STDF and with all the international intergovernmental organizations on capacity building programs. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Betsy. And indeed, we're looking forward also to collaborating next week with the AUC and USDA colleagues on a learning event in Rwanda that will also disseminate the STDF work on evidence-based approaches to prioritize SPS investments and leverage resources. Jeremy, moving back to you for a final question. In a couple of minutes, could you sum up, based on your experiences on the ground, what you think is needed to improve the impact and sustainability of SPS capacity development interventions in a way that better addresses these 21st century issues? and food systems, One Health, and everything that other speakers have highlighted. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Marlene. So before going through a couple of individual maybe points, I would say that for ourselves as an organization, if we take a step back and we look at the evolution in terms of the design of programs that we've been managing during the past 20 years, I think it's kind of a nice illustration of how today within the programs, as mentioned by Remco, one of which is this Fit for Market Plus program. Some of these most urgent issues, 21st century issues, are fully embedded within the program. So it was not necessarily the case 20 years ago. 20 years ago, we really started by designing and implementing programs that were focusing solely on MRL compliance. And progressively, the scope of these interventions quite naturally was extended, of course, in full accordance with the donors, but also because not only it was in accordance with the donors, because it was replying, of course, to a concrete need to have a more holistic, integrated support package. And mainly here through our main entry point was private sector and MSMEs. So it was to respond to some very practical needs where it was becoming almost impossible to disentangle and separate SPS directly related issues to other, being on the environmental side, being on economic performance, being on social protection. And so this has been really a natural kind of evolution, a reality that we're living today in the type of work that we're performing. We believe, of course, because of the cross-cutting nature of SPS in itself, but also coming back to the first part of my intervention to your first question, because up until now, what we've seen is that to effectively manage SPS capacity building interventions, it required the right enabling environment to be set in the first place. So once that right enabling environment is there, once the methodological frameworks and pipelines are there, it becomes, of course, much easier to start working also on a range of topics. That's from a methodological perspective. And from a technical perspective, we disaggregate some of the aspects we've been working on for 20 years with MSMEs, on setting up a quality management system, setting up traceability. Well, these are elements which are becoming really extremely fundamental in light of a range of new issues which are becoming clearer by the day. And for which, of course, regulation also is coming. What we've seen over the years, we've had kind of two dynamics on SPS. We tried to, and again, this is from our experience from a practitioner's perspective. So I'm not saying has been the case in all sectors, but looking at, for instance, fruit and veg, what we saw 20 years ago. First, we had a regulatory drive. Clear push, which was driving kind of this need for compliance. Then following that, well, we have some reactions from markets, from private sector, retailers or importers setting up a range of private standards, which further kind of drove this need for compliance. Naturally, the markets continued to also evolve, and a number of demands started to emerge on the sustainability front. And so we kind of embarked that already 5, 7, 8 years ago for a range, for a number of players, not all of them, of course, depending on the markets and on the specific demands from their buyers. In a nutshell, what we believe, and it's going to echo, I guess, part of the first part of the answer to your first question. It's from and it's what Betsy was mentioning from inception phase, from the start. It's having this holistic systems approach, recognizing the interrelations between SPS and a number of SDGs as presented by Melvin during the introductory presentation. That is absolutely essential. On the networks part, it has been said, collaboration, yes, of course. We try to invest a lot on our side. Must say that we are currently going through our own reflection as an organization because we feel that there's a huge untapped potential there. We don't necessarily have all the right answers because of the overload in terms of information, and so there's kind of an equation there to resolve because we see the richness in terms of peer-to-peer learning, in terms of overall kind of development opportunities by strengthening links or mutual understandings between networks, but we haven't found the recipe there yet for us on our scale from our perspective. In terms of innovation and technology, yes, it will have will bring not only bringing new technologies and new innovation, but there are a number of things out there which should be made available on a broader scale. And that is already a challenge in itself, and having the economic model, the skills around it to make sure that they can be fully adopted. And of course, continue to work on policy level and on the institution side, Commons Authority, being able to think out of the box, given the scarcity, limited resources we are all facing.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. I know that you have so much more that you could share. It's fine. We all take a little more time, but it's time now to pass it to the audience. We don't have much time left, but we have some time for a couple of questions from either participants in the room or on the Zoom. I'm not sure if there are hands up on Zoom. Anyone in the room has, a quick question or a comment, a thought also linked potentially to the discussions that you had yesterday in group 1 and some of those linkages in terms of the connection with STDF's work. I guess the groups are trying to also work across group. It's been a long couple of days, I guess. Anything? I mean, if there are no questions from the audience, maybe just another 1 minute or 30 seconds to each of the panelists. I think Remco had something that he wanted to add, and then maybe we can pass the floor to you, Joe, because we also have, you're supposed to be wrapping up now. So, so 30 seconds. Let's start with you, Remco. Just a couple of key messages. In 30 seconds or less. Thank you.
Oh, I wouldn't dare. But I'll use my 30 seconds to answer an unanswered question about gender. Also because I see a member of the informal working group on trade and gender in the WTO. So I have to tell you that we really appreciate the gender audit that you did as SCDF secretariat. And I think the assessment gives us also some, I don't want to overload the boat, but it gives us some more stuff or things to think about going forward and how to improve the gender mainstreaming in across all STDF work streams to improve further the results and impact. And I finish by saying that when this organization went through monitoring and evaluation of the Aid for Trade initiative the last time, now a year or 2 years ago, 96% of developing country respondents said that Aid for Trade has a role in addressing the constraints faced by women. So perhaps the STDF can also make a contribution to that.
Thank you, Rem.
My 30 seconds. I think just to acknowledge that the STDF is a very unique mechanism. If you think about the founding partners and how they've come together, and then we've got donors, private sector, often people in a room that would not normally sit in a room together collaborating. So I think there is something incredibly unique about the mechanism and even the way the projects are submitted and assessed. So I think it is, just to recognise the value of the facility and encourage, the participation of beneficiary countries to provide applications to support the very good projects that we heard examples of today. So really just to support all of the contributors, the Secretariat, and all the members and the countries that are recipients to this work.
Thank you, Gillian. Jeremy, a couple of key messages.
Very, very short because it took too much, but to thank, of course, the STDF, not only I would say directly in the projects themselves, but as partners to exchange ideas. It's also important during less formal kind of settings. That's also collaboration. We need that collective intelligence. So that will be my final message. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. If John and Betsy are online, please do come in for 30 seconds if you're still with us.
Sure, I can jump in. I'll leave with my thoughts on collaboration, because a lot is happening in SPS, especially when you look at cross-cutting issues. Collaboration, because for sustainability of all of our work, we need to be working in partnership with governments and on a bilateral level, and then also cooperation. We all have a lot of very good knowledge that needs to be shared. So let's work together in order to, thank you.
Thanks, Betsy. And final word for you, John, a couple of messages.
Thank you very much, Marlon, and sincere thanks to SDDF for putting together this excellent program. I think it will be interesting to have a repository and listening to the different interventions that have come in. Interesting to have a repository that pulls together the different knowledge management product and tools. I think it will serve us very well, and I see the STDF well positioned really to do that. But I would add my voice to the fact that it's all about partnerships and smart collaborations, and certainly we should continue to combine our forces together to deliver safe food to consumers.
Thanks so much, John. So I'm not going to try even to sum up the discussion this afternoon. I've taken notes. I think we have a lot to reflect on and to think about too. I just pass over to Joe for some concluding remarks. Thank you, Joe. Back to you.
Thank you so much. So thank you, colleagues, for a fantastic 3-hour session. Thank you to our second panel, to our colleagues online. Agree. It's I think we've heard a lot today. We had 3 great presentations about STDF projects that are delivering real benefits. They're building SPS capacity. There's collaboration, partnership, skills, knowledge, engagement in standard setting, and of course, the ultimate goal, facilitating trade and delivering real economic benefit. Collaboration is key. We've heard it again and again. Context is important, continuous learning. John, you said compliance tends to improve when countries are involved in the establishment of standards. And that was a really strong theme and discussion that we've been talking about in Group 5. And of course, from Betsy, we've had another call to action. So yesterday, I was struck by the Canadian farmer who told us all as policymakers that we were really important and our jobs were important and that we had a fantastic role. And Betsy has again reminded us this afternoon that actually our role as policymakers, as regulators, is really key to supporting safe trade and of course, economic benefit, and really, I guess, delivering on the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's pretty exciting. Thank you very much for joining us for day 2. Looking forward to the rest of the committee this week. We will of course do a report to the group in terms of the discussion we've had today. We'll also call out to people in May. You'll recall our plan is to continue this type of conversation, and we want to hear about the support both from donor countries and recipient countries outside of STDF. And John, a fantastic suggestion there that, you know, potentially there's an opportunity to bring together all the knowledge, all the tools. There's obviously so much around in STDF and then more broadly. So thanks everyone for your participation. Good evening, and thank you to our interpreters.